Welcome to our podcast, Raising Bigs. This podcast is an ongoing conversation between myself and my young adult son. We're ready and willing to talk about all the things families might experience in their lives and relationships, both as parents and young adults, from teens to 20-somethings, the good, bad, and sometimes the ugly. In this episode, we're sharing how we are able to find peace in times of unrest around us. If you're walking around with all kinds of pent-up negative energy, chaos absorbed from the world around you, you might not interact with your parent or big from a place of peace and love. They might get the worst of you instead of the best of you. For each of us, learning to process this heaviness and return to a state of peace is a journey. Some of us have had more practice than others. But I think we'd all agree family life is better when we're able to interact from a level, calm nervous system, when we can work to understand each other from a place of internal equilibrium and peace. How do we go about finding and keeping that peace? Let's dive in. I'm Marci, and I'm the mom.
And I'm Cade, and I'm her kid. Finding your peace is a process that everyone needs to learn for themselves and figure out how they are able to find peace. How you define peace and how you get there is unique to every person. So what works for one person might not work for the next. Many times when there is tension between parents and their bigs, it is due to one or both of the parties entering interactions with an already agitated state. Coming in all amped up and ready to fight is not going to be productive when it comes to addressing problems or situations in your parent and big relationship. So, if you can find peace, often you're able to shed the weight of the worry and stress that you are carrying and go into those conversations with a much more clear and productive mind. Can you come to the table in a state of chill? You for sure can, but you have to be committed into making peace your default and that being your natural state. My mom and I find our peace differently, as will each of you. These are just a few of our ideas, giving you a place to start in finding your own. Mom, what is one tool you use to find your peace?
So I'm going to start with if I am in the moment, like all of a sudden feeling stress and peace. So my number one tool that I use is called 4-count breathing. And so if I feel my nervous system revving up, and this is a really simple tool that you can use anywhere. No one even needs to know you're using it. And I do teach this to a lot of my life coach clients, but it immediately will bring your nervous system down and bring you to a better state of calm. So all that involves is breathing into a count of 4. You hold your breath for a count of 4. Then you breathe out for a count of 4 and hold for a count of 4. And you do that 4 times. So it doesn't take you very long to execute that. It's very easy to remember: in for 4, hold for 4, out for 4, hold for 4. Do it 4 times. So that is one of the things that I do that really can help to calm my nervous system and bring me almost into an immediate state of peace and harmony in my internal nervous system. So how about you, Cade? What's one of the tools you use?
Yeah, I like that one because like you said, you can do it anywhere. You can do it by yourself. It doesn't involve, a big announcement or anything like that. You can kind of just do it. If you're in a tough meeting or something at work and you're starting to, get a little stressed out, you can just do that and no one will know the difference. One way that I keep the peace or find peace for myself sometimes is removing myself from the situation of whatever is, causing me stress, whether that be a relationship with a friend or family or something at work or whatever it may be. Sometimes I think you need to remove yourself. I do think on one end of that spectrum, some people, including myself, kind of fall into a habit of always removing themselves and never addressing problems, and we don't want that. But sometimes it's okay to just say, okay, I need 30 minutes to just, if, let's say, example of a parent and a big, let's say me and mom, are maybe getting into a disagreement and, we've just been clashing and, neither one of us is kind of seeing each other's side and things like that, which those arguments don't happen very often between us, but just as an example, sometimes you just need to say, okay, let me just take 30 minutes and, we can both kind of just breathe, calm down, think about things. Because I think sometimes when you're in kind of those stressful situations, you're so focused on proving your point or being right or, making sure that your voice is heard, whatever it may be. And sometimes you just need that time to just take a second, be by yourself, cool down, and then readdress the problem.
Yeah, and you don't need anybody's permission to do that, right? Like everybody has the ability to step away for those few minutes. My number 2 that would kind of piggyback on that, removing yourself from the situation momentarily, would be to give yourself permission to remove yourself for an extended period of time from life, right? So one of the most powerful tools I have ever found is retreat. And so that can look like an individual retreat where I'm going to stay overnight in a hotel for a night, or a tiny little Airbnb or whatever that might be. It could look like a retreat to my office upstairs for a Saturday. It could look like an independent vacation, which I have done before, where I'm going all by myself to somewhere where I know no one. And there are just times, especially if life has been really high level, crazy vibration, right? Like you just need to chill out for a good long time. Giving yourself the ability to do that at whatever price point you can afford to do that. Like I said, sometimes it's upstairs. I have a bed in here. I could stay up here all weekend and just get food delivered to the door if I wanted to. But giving yourself that right to remove yourself for an extended period of time, even if it's just a weekend away to go visit friends or whatever. I know, especially in a situation where a big is living at home, sometimes you just need a break. And, I know for us, it's been good. Like if Tim and I go travel, you're here alone with the dogs, and vice versa. If you're traveling, we're here alone with the dogs. But just sometimes that physical removal outside of your regularly scheduled programming, as I call it, gives you the ability to calm yourself. So that would be my number two.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think kind of like you said, removing yourself from kind of that regular programming and that everyday life. Sometimes you kind of just get, especially if your life is busy, if you're talking about you have young kids and you're working and things like that. A lot of the times it just like is you wake up every day and you get your kids ready for school, get them off to school, you come home, you go to work, you come home from work, you get your kids off the bus, you cook them dinner, you do homework, and it kind of you get into a cycle of just doing the same thing over and over again and not really ever being able to find that sense of peace because life is so go 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 that sometimes I think it's important to remove yourself and kind of return back to that state.
Yeah, because that's not a healthy place to be, that wash, rinse, repeat, right? Never
Mhm.
gives you a period to kind of assess even where you're at. You're just in survival mode. And so you're not going to be your best self. You're not going to be approaching your relationship with your people from your best place. If that's not truly living your life. That's just going through the motions, right? And
For
a
sure.
lot of us parents did that for a lot of years, but when you know better, you do better. So now I'm hoping this younger generation, your friends listening and watching what happens to a lot of parents, which sometimes comes up as health diagnoses. It comes up with, fractured relationships with their adult children. And so hopefully your generation has learned that it is perfectly acceptable to do that. And you don't need anyone's permission again, other than your own. What would your number two be, Cade?
For sure. My number two would be to do something that brings you joy. So let's say, you are maybe spending a lot of time at work or doing homework or whatever it is, and that's kind of stressing you out. It might seem counterintuitive to take 30 minutes and, you know, cook something you enjoy cooking, or if you enjoy sewing, sew something, or if you enjoy painting, go paint, or if you enjoy, just being out in nature, go for a walk. I think sometimes we think, oh, I have all this, I'm working on this big project at work, so it has to take all of my attention. And I think sometimes that can actually end up hurting you because you just are so involved in that project at work or whatever it may be. And so I think taking some time to do something that brings you joy, whether that be, going down and talking to your kid if you're, working super hard up in your office, or like I said, sewing or knitting, whatever it is, activity that you enjoy. Sometimes taking 30 minutes just to kind of take away from whatever is stressing you out can kind of reset you, bring you that peace, and then allow you to go back into whatever you're working on with more of a clear mind.
For sure. And I especially love the creative things you talked about. Like, I think a lot of times that's the first thing to get crossed off the list, much like movement, right? Like taking care of ourselves, getting that exercise in. Any of those things that for me are creative, like to even just take 30 minutes takes you completely out. You can't afford the retreat. You could afford to take 30 minutes and use an adult coloring book and color or do whatever it is that does bring you joy, and it does let you feel level. So like even if you're approaching a difficult conversation with your big or your parent, maybe doing something like that first to help you go in not from a reactive state, right, but from a place of calm. So I like that idea.
Sure.
So my number three would be spending time in nature or in something that makes you feel like you're part of a larger entity. So whether that is volunteering for a nonprofit, whether that is spending time at the ocean, whether that is going and sitting on the bench down by the creek a few blocks away from our house, you need to remind yourself that you are part of something bigger, because we very often get this very narrow viewpoint of what's going on in our life, when really that problem you're having today with your teenager, right, is a very tiny speck in what's going on in the world. I think it's really easy for us to blow those things up and make them way more impactful than they actually need to be. And so taking yourself into a situation where you realize there is a bigger piece out there for you, that you are part of the universe, you are part of your community, go help someone, things like anything you can do to pull yourself out of the immediate situation and remind yourself that you are part of something bigger. It just kind of takes some of the pressure off of the what is a tiny little thing. May not feel like a tiny little thing in the moment, but big picture, it is a tiny little thing. So that would be my number 3, is remove yourself and remind yourself that you're part of something bigger by actually going and spending time in that particular type of environment.
For sure. And I like that because, like you said, sometimes you just get so caught up in the day to day and you just think, kind of what's in your realm is all that there is. But realizing there's just so much more out there. And like you said, in the grand scheme of things, you know, so a lot of our problems aren't that big. And, it might be a problem for a day or a week or so, but in a month you won't even remember what you're going through. So definitely agree with that one. My third one would be to do something for your physical health. I think that kind of, I am a big believer that your physical health ties into your mental health. So, if you are really stressed out, things like going and exercising, taking a walk, or going to the gym, or anything like that, or cooking yourself a healthy, well-balanced meal. I think sometimes when we get in a state of stress, especially kind of, when we talk about busy lives and things like that, it's easy to just go get, fast food really quick, or, heat up a frozen pizza for your third meal in a row, or whatever it may be. And although I do think that on one end, a lot of that stuff can be, it can help our mental health if you use it as kind of like a treat or a reward or just a once in a while. I've really been craving Chick-fil-A or whatever it is. So, let me go get some. But I think if you're using it as kind of just a way to make your life simpler, I think sometimes if you're just constantly feeding your body food that maybe isn't that nutritious, or you're not taking time to, work out your body, whether that be a walk or a jog or ride the bike or lift weights or whatever it is. I think sometimes getting that energy and those emotions out physically will help clear up your mind. And then, going back to food, feeding your body nutritious food, that then you're able to handle that stress a little bit better when you are properly fueled. So I think that definitely makes a difference.
Yeah, I agree with you, Kate. And I think, we forget how stressful it is on our body, right? If we are not taking care of ourselves, like just the actual physical reaction of your body when all you've been doing is feeding it junk food, right? And then you expect your brain to be able to operate from a state of peace, right? When something terrible happens, but you haven't equipped yourself to be able to do that. So this one was going to be my number 5, but now I'm bumping it to number 4 because it piggybacks off what you said. But it's about setting yourself up for success. And the way in which I do that is my morning ritual. So I know I've talked about that before, but if you can develop a habit, so whether this is your morning ritual, and I'll tell you about mine in just a second, or if this is you deciding you're going to run or work out 5 days a week, or if this is you deciding you're going to read fiction for a half an hour every night before bed, or you're going to do a brain dump and journal all of your worries onto a piece of paper, whatever the routines or rituals are, I prefer the word ritual, that you can instill in your life that help you to just operate from a more level state overall, but then it gives you something to rely on during times of stress that will automatically bring you down. But it takes practice, and it's only good, I remember the very first thing I heard about is like, imagine your favorite quiet place, right? Like mine is at the beach. Like I'm sitting at the beach and the waves are rolling in and I can feel the sand and I can feel the sun on my body, and like, can you escape in your head to that place? So that's, one example of the, having some kind of a routine or ritual, but that envisioning doesn't work if you don't try it until the moment you're in the heat of it, right? So my morning ritual of, I journal for, I don't know, 15, 20 minutes. I will read some nonfiction, 15, 20 minutes. I have my candle lit. I have my nice coffee house playlist from Spotify. I've got my little heated blanket. I've got my coffee. Like it is a ritual of what I do in the morning. But if I do that, I'm going into the world from that place of strength. If I have practiced envisioning my happy place, then when I'm in that stressful meeting, I can take myself to that happy place, right? Just on an instant, because I have practiced it over time. So for me, that would be my number 4, is setting yourself up for success by practicing the ways that bring you peace and calming on a regular basis, so that you can lean on that tool that then becomes your crutch in the moments that are more stressful in your life.
For sure. I like that you said kind of practice it when you're not in that moment of stress. Because I think a lot of times, and not even necessarily even just when it comes to finding our peace, but just in all areas of life, a lot of times, just as a society, we wait until things are bad in order to fix them. We wait until we get maybe a health diagnosis to when we start focusing on our health, or we wait until, we're failing a class in order to start studying for a test or whatever it may be. So I think practicing that when you're in that normal state is a good idea, because otherwise you get into that state of stress and you're like, okay, I remember, life coach Marci told me to do 4 count breathing, but how do I do it again?
Mhm.
How does that work again? And so you're not able to effectively use the tools because you haven't practiced them and you don't know how your body is supposed to feel when you're done and different things like that. So I think practicing that when you don't necessarily need it in that moment is can be beneficial.
And if you've been living like we've talked about, you're that busy parent who's working full time, running kids around, all that, or you're the busy college student going to school full time, working full time. Like if that is your steady state of existence, right? Sometimes you don't even remember what it is to feel peaceful. Like you don't recognize that in your brain, you don't recognize it in your heart, you don't recognize it in your body. And so you have to reteach yourself sometimes what it is to be in that state. And you can't do that, right, under duress. You have to do that at times when things are more level. So how about you, Kate? What's your number 4?
Sure. My number 4 is to practice forgiveness, whether that be with other people or even yourself. I think sometimes we, just as a society, myself included, can kind of hold on to negative things or negative experiences or the way people hurt you or things like that. And I do think it is important to acknowledge that. And, if someone does, do something that you don't like, not saying you need to just forget about it and move on and whatever. But I think sometimes we hold on to that hurt and things like that. And that can prevent us from getting to a state of peace. And I think sometimes we even do that with ourselves. We might beat ourselves up for, not being as prepared as we should have been to take this test, or not being as prepared for this job interview and maybe we didn't get the job, or maybe you do get into an argument with your big and you didn't handle it the way that you should have or the way you wanted to. I think sometimes we can hold on to that and kind of just keep replaying that in our head, and that can prevent us from getting to that point of peace. So I think practicing forgiveness and allowing yourself and others to make mistakes and to not do everything perfectly, I think can definitely be a very freeing experience.
I love that, Kate. And to kind of piggyback on that, like one of actually it was the first book I read this year was The Let Them Theory by Mel Robbins. And it really is about releasing that, right? Like if someone else does something that hurts your feelings or makes you disappointed or that really makes you feel like you don't want anything to do with them for a hot minute, right? Like to learn to let them make their decisions and live their life, but then you also get to let me. How am I reacting to that? And so when you're talking about practicing forgiveness, right, and letting go of all of that, like who are you really freeing when you
Mm-hmm.
forgive someone? You're freeing yourself, right? Because you're not carrying that with you. So I love that, Kate, that practicing forgiveness, I think, can really go a long way, showing a lot of grace to
Mm-hmm.
the other people. We talk primarily about the relationship between parents and bigs, but showing grace to your parent, showing grace to your big, we're all just doing this for the first time. So
Mm-hmm.
I think that is really important to figure
For
that
sure.
out.
And I think, like you said, it it's benefiting you. You're doing it for yourself and you're not doing it for other people. And I think that was something that I had to work on in my own personal life, is a lot of the times I felt like, okay, if I forgive someone, that means that I'm telling them that their behavior or whatever they did is okay. And that's how I viewed it. If I said, okay, you did this to me and I forgive you for that, I thought that meant, okay, you can do that whenever you want because I'm just going to forgive you. But I think as I've gotten older, as I realized, no, you're forgiving them for yourself. And then you're also choosing, if we're talking about relationships, you're choosing how to move forward with that person. So your relationship might not be the same. If it's a parent, that does something that hurts you, you have to be willing to navigate that new relationship and how things might change after that situation.
Yeah, and it's okay to have boundaries, right? Even with your parent. And I think, there can very much be a mindset of, okay, I'm cutting them off, we can have no relationship, when in fact maybe just having more solid boundaries for yourself would mean that you wouldn't have to completely cut yourself off from your family, that you would actually be able to have a relationship of some sort. That being said, I'm not talking about toxic parents, because those do exist out there.
Yeah,
Toxic bigs also exist. Like, if it truly is in your best interest to have zero relationship, like, that can happen. But I think a lot of times we're quick to not practice that forgiveness, right? And to move into that, oh, well, I'm just done with you attitude, and we lose out a lot of times on what could be a healthy relationship, but with really strong boundaries installed, right?
for sure. So what is your fifth and last one, Mom?
Yeah, my fifth one is a little bit woo woo. It's about trusting your intuition. So I think we spend a lot of time in our heads thinking about, oh my gosh, I've got this to do, I've got that to do. And we're just running through this eternal to-do list. That's where we live in the hamster wheel, right? Is in our head. And so if you're feeling stressed out, you are not going to get calm by thinking about your to-do list. That's not going to happen. If you have hard feelings about something that, let's say, something your big just did, or you're feeling embarrassed because they did that and your friends and family are going to find out about it, or you're feeling hurt because of something they said to you as a parent, this could also be, on the other side, on the big side. If you're living in your heart, in your feelings, and making all of your approaches come from that place of hurt feelings, I think if you haven't processed that emotion, you're not going to be able to come through. So you can't be focusing on the hamster wheel in your head. You can't be focusing on the well of hard feelings that might be happening in your chest if you haven't dealt with them. But there's a third piece to this, right? And that's your gut, and that's your intuition. And a lot of people either never learned how to trust their intuition, or they don't know how to access it because they've become so disconnected from it. They've been living up here all the time, and they're not connected with their gut. So if you are able to reestablish that connection with your intuition and really trust what your body, what your soul is telling you to do, it's incorporating all of this, right? And you might be trying to make a decision. You might be trying to move forward in your relationship with your child. You might be trying to decide, okay, what do I do now if my big has gone astray? Or what do I do as a big if my parent has gone astray? Because that happens too, right? But trusting your gut. And so that you have to get quiet in order to be able to hear that intuition. And so that quietness can happen in a lot of the ways we talked about, right? That can happen in your morning ritual. That can happen when you're out on your run. That can happen in a lot of ways. It can happen just sitting on your front porch watching the sunrise, right? But if you can learn to tap into that intuition and just do the next right thing, your intuition is not going to lead you astray. And so I have found that, when I stepped off that hamster wheel and worked really, really hard to reestablish that connection with my gut after having worked through a lot of feelings, you've got to give yourself time to do that. But I can totally tap into my intuition now and can be like, okay, what is the next right thing for me to do? Not what's the next right thing for Cade to do, because that's Cade's side of the fence. That's back to the boundaries, right? That belongs to him. But what's the next best thing for me to do? And so I am able to find my peace by trusting my intuition. And so if something feels off, like before I would even approach you on something, like I would really go deep with myself and be like,
Mhm.
okay, what's the hamster wheel thing that's going through my head? Okay, what are the feelings that I need to process for this? And now what is my gut telling me? So that would be my fifth, is to rediscover, if you don't know what it is, or learn about it and learn to connect with that intuition and to trust it. And once you get to that point where you're trusting your intuition, it really does make bringing yourself into a peaceful state much easier to access.
For sure. I like that a lot. And mine is kind of pretty similar. Just kind of going into whatever is happening, whatever's stressing you out is going to end at some point in time. And I find a lot of peace in that. And that's something I realized recently. If you are, getting into an argument with your parent, at some point in time, that argument's going to be over. You guys are either going to agree to disagree, or one of you is going to change your mind, or you're just going to decide to leave it and not talk about it anymore. Whatever the situation is going to end. If you are struggling with a really big project at work, at some point in time, it's going to end. The project is going to be over. So I think it's important to kind of realize that, and I find a lot of peace in that, of just knowing, okay, this project at work is stressing me out, but I know that it's due in 2 weeks and it'll be done by then. Or I'm living at home with my parents and it's really stressing me out and we're constantly arguing. Not the case for me, but just an example. But I know I'm moving out in 3 months, so I just have to make it until then. Or whatever is stressing you out, whatever, is keeping you away from that peace. And it's important to remember that it's going to end at some point in time. It'll be over. The problem will be solved. I like to think about things in the past that I've gone through and think about how I've made it through that. If I, just an example for my personal life, if I'm, stressed out about school and thinking, okay, I've got this due and this due and this due, I think about the other times in school where I had several things due and it was a busy time and how I navigated that. Or if you're starting a new job and it's stressing you out and you're just not, catching on as quickly as you thought you would, think about all the other new jobs you've started and how that's been going for you. So I think really understanding that everything is temporary and everything will come to an end at some point in time can definitely bring you a lot of peace.
I love that. Like looking at your track record, right? You can do hard things and you've
Uh-huh,
proven that. And so when you look back at those things, it will help to boost your confidence, right? And so when something is stealing your peace, to be able to remember that it is temporary. This too shall pass is a phrase for a reason. I know a lot of people get really irritated when they are in a state of stress and someone says that to them.
uh-huh,
It is in fact true. I think it's an overused platitude, right? That people throw.
uh-huh,
To me, it's a way when people don't really know what to say to make you feel better, they're going to throw a line like that at you, right? And that's not really helpful. That's not a life preserver, right? To pull you out. It's just kind of a you keep that problem over there kind
yeah.
of response. So, but I do love that, Kate, that, remembering that you don't have to allow things like that to steal your peace because you can do hard things and you have a good track record and it's
Mhm,
great. So I think
exactly.
it's great.
Exactly. Well, I enjoyed hearing yours and I enjoyed sharing mine. I think they were all pretty good. And I know with all the crazy that tries to steal our peace in this life, it can be hard imagining the feeling of peaceful. Sometimes it feels so far away and peace seems unattainable almost. But I can tell you that once you do the work and figure out how to get yourself into that state of peace, things will still agitate you. However, you'll be able to work through those feelings faster by using the tools that, we've given you or some that you're able to think of yourself. You'll be able to use those tools to return to a state of calm and a state of peace and not let life get to you and stress you out.
And definitely when you're feeling peaceful most of the time, instead of walking around all stressed out, your relationship with those you love the most is definitely going to benefit. And so it is so much easier to navigate the changes that both Biggs and parents are going through, both together and personally, right? When neither of you is reactive and you're just walking around a bundle of frayed nerves. So
Mhm.
anything else you'd like to add before you close us out, Kate?
For sure. I like that you said that, when you're in that state of peace, it's just easier to navigate everything, whether that be your personal life or your relationship with your parent or your relationship with your bigs. I think, just being able to go into situations with a clear mind just makes you a little more equipped to handle the challenges that life throws at you. So I think that's definitely a good point. But with that being said, that is a wrap for this episode of Raising Bigs. We thank you all for listening today. We hope you found some takeaways, a fresh perspective, and maybe even an action step or two in this episode. Again, we are not experts, but we can authentically share what we're learning in hopes of making the path a little more joy filled for those who are listening. You can find this podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and on YouTube. Please subscribe and share with those in your circle who you think might benefit from hearing it. And a new episode is released on those three platforms every single week.
You can visit my life coaching website at marcihawkinson.com or email me at lifecoachmarci@gmail.com. I'm also on Facebook at Life Coach Marci and Instagram at life_coach_Marci. Where can our listeners find you, Cade?
My handle across all social media platforms is at the Cade Berrigan. That's where you can find me. The best way to contact us or give us feedback is to DM either one of us on social media, or again to reach out on the contact me page on my mom's website, which is marcihawkinson.com. We appreciate any feedback, topic ideas, or questions that you may like to share, and we will see you next time on Raising Bigs.